Hello and welcome back to another Jeep Frog Ministry video. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Harris, pastor, chaplain, author, and Jeep enthusiast. I'm also the founder of the Jeep Frog Ministry. This video is video number 2 in our series on Bible reading helps. So if you've not watched part 1 of this series, then go back and watch it first so you can get the big picture with us that we're trying to paint. In our last video, we looked at the first 5 books of the Bible, as well as the Old Testament and the New Testament. The first 5 books of the Bible are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We now come to the book of Joshua. Joshua was a great leader that God used to lead his people after his leader Moses. And Joshua was the one who led them into the promised land. In the book of Joshua, we see God's people having to fight the nations that were in that area that God had promised to them just so that they could enter the land. Joshua led the nation of Israel through many battles and many victories, even having to battle themselves at times and their lack of faith in God. But eventually, they entered the land that God had promised to them. Once the nation of Israel entered the promised land, they experienced great plenty and great blessings from God, and then they turned their backs on God again. Joshua shows us victory through obedience to God, what God can do when his people are yielded to him. We come to the book of Judges. The book of Judges is a historical account of the judges God used to judge his people. The nation of Israel had resorted to doing what they wanted to do, and they had rejected what God had told them to do and what they had promised God that they would do. The book of Judges tells us of a nation without a leader. Therefore, God provided military leaders called judges to deliver them from their enemies. The next book of the Bible may seem to be out of place, but it's not. The book of Ruth is a beautiful picture of God's working his plan among the chaos. Ruth is the great-great-great-grandmother to King David. Therefore, the book of Ruth is preparing us to leave a theocracy or God-led nation and move to a monarchy or a king-led nation. The next 2 books we will put together, they're 1st and 2nd Samuel. We start these books with God leading his people, but they rebelled against him and they cried out for a king to lead them instead of God. Samuel was a priest of God and also the God-given leader who he then used to give the people their wish and anoint Saul as the first king of Israel. We're moving very, very quickly from a theocracy to a monarchy. 1 Samuel mainly deals with King Saul, and 2 Samuel deals mainly with King David. The nation of Israel could not bring themselves to keep their promises to God and to follow him. They at times followed him, and then they fell away and followed the world. Soon, God's going to have enough, and he's going to put them back into captivity. We will lump the next 4 books of the Bible together. This is 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. These books give us a history of the monarchy of Israel and the kings that served Israel. After King David's son Solomon reigned, the nation of Israel became a divided kingdom. No longer was there unity as the kingdom split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. God wanted to lead his people, and God still today wants to lead his people. The key back then is the same as it is today. Are we willing to allow him to lead us, or are we seeking for something else to lead us in our lives? By the end of these 4 books, we have Israel, a nation back into captivity, although this time the nation is divided and enters captivity to 2 separate heathen nations. We now are up to the book of Ezra. Ezra was a scribe to whom God used to begin a restoration process with his people who were in captivity. The book of Ezra shows us restoration through the Word of God. God is always willing to restore, but He only restores His way. And we can guarantee His way will always be through His Word. We then come to the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah tells us the continuing story of God restoring His people. The book of Nehemiah shows us restoration through prayer. When Nehemiah was given the opportunity to ask the heathen king for a request, we are told from Nehemiah, "So I prayed to the God of heaven." God is always ready to restore those who have walked away from Him if we are willing to humbly cry out to Him. We can be sure the Word of God and prayer are God's mode of restoration for our life as well. We again come to another book that seems to be out of place, but it's not. The book of Esther is vitally important to the restoration of God's people. God's people are in captivity, and a wicked man in the king's leadership wants the Israelites wiped out. It was Esther who God used to save His people. She was told that God placed her in the kingdom for such a time as this. In the book of Esther, we can learn that the providence of God is always working parallel to the will of man throughout history. We're now approaching the book of Job. Job is right where it should be in the organization of the biblical books. Job shows us the sovereignty of God, no matter what it is that's happening in our lives. God is in control, even through the chaos that we are sustaining in our life. It's a fitting book for those who, in captivity or bondage, were looking for a way out, to show that God is always in control, and He's always willing, and He's always waiting, and He's always ready to restore. Job was a man who did his best to avoid evil in his life and in his family, and yet evil still came to his house. He did not sin, but still went through chaos with God right by his side. Well, that takes us through a lot of the Old Testament. I told you we were going to go quickly. In the next video, we should be able to get all the way through the Old Testament. That's how fast we're going. I'm hoping we have just 2 or 3 more videos is all we're going to have here in this big overview that we're giving of the Word of God. And again, we're looking at it through a telescope so we can have an understanding of the full scope of the Bible before we start looking in the nitty-gritty. I hope these videos have been a help to you. Remember, it is only a very brief overview to give you the big picture about the Bible and to help you in your time of reading. So thank you for watching, and join me for all of the Jeep Frog Ministry videos. They're there to help you in your spiritual journey. This is Pastor Jeff, reminding you to always just enter every day prayerfully, fully relying on God.